on this computer. And just since we'll be posting this, I just want to give a quick explanation. This is our team to develop an empathy definitions typology, and we're using the empathy circle practice to discuss the topic. And our topic is just any thoughts about the empathy definitions project, whatever's alive for you. And we're not having any time limit, so I just wanted to give a bit of background to that. So whoever would like to start can start and select your speaker or your listener. Well, I'm going to start and I'll speak to you, Shannon. So I'm super thrilled about this project. Like, I think I should have started this 11 years ago when I first started or 13 years ago when I started on empathy. I have been gathering a lot about the definitions of empathy, but I should have been really focused doing what we're doing now to really get this typology together.
Well, you're saying you're thrilled about this project because you're feeling sort of like maybe it's something you could have started, years ago when you were first started doing empathy circles, but you're just kind of happy to be getting to it now.
Yeah, and I've talked to some, I've been trying to talk to others, about this project. So I talked to Marco Iacoboni. I interviewed him several times, and he's an early researcher on the neuroscience of empathy, and with Jeremy Howick, who does the Oxford Empathy Healthcare program. And I know a lot of people in the community that I like to reach out to and say, hey, how about, contributing to this, or at least, have some discussions with them. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. You've been sort of having conversations with neuroscience researchers, one of which is Jeremy Howick and others, and kind of getting a lot of good information there, and looking forward to having more of those conversations.
And even got the domain name empathydefinition.com. So it now works. Just go to empathydefinition.com. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm excited about that. But
so you got a domain name, a great fitting domain name, empathydefinitions.com.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel fully heard.
Awesome. Alison, do you want to be my listener?
Sure thing.
All right. So yeah, it's great to be here and a part of this, and definitely feeling some contagion in terms of Edwin's excitement about this going forward, and yeah, just kind of bringing my thoughts into this space as we start to consider the typology.
So you're feeling excited to be here and sharing some of those emotions with Edwin, and looking forward to the opportunity to sharing your own ideas about the definition of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess in the midst of kind of collecting my thoughts around this, and Edwin mentioned neuroscience research, and that always kind of gets me thinking about some of the most contemporary research on this topic. And I just I know what I've researched in that area, but haven't been as active in it lately. So I'm kind of looking forward to kind of seeing where the conversation goes if we discuss that topic.
Yeah, so bringing up neuro research off what Edwin was talking about, and sort of you mentioned you have some experience in this yourself, but that you want to talk through maybe some of their influences on this field.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just say, let's see, kind of looking at the interconnections between some of the conclusions of the neuroscience research and how it might intersect with psychoanalysis, or more like psychotherapy process is basically where my experience kind of begins and ends with social neuroscience stuff. But nonetheless, it's it has very much perked my interest as those two fields, psychoanalysis and social neuroscience, are beginning to overlap a little bit. So
Okay, yeah, so bringing in your expertise, which I believe is in psychoanalysis, and seeing the intersections there with neuro research, and then perhaps how they can complement each other in our understanding here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's all for now. I feel heard. Thank you.
Edwin, I'll let you if that's okay.
Yep, you bet.
So I'm also really interested in hearing what you guys think. I think I'm sort of thinking first about being a listener and hearing your different ideas. I know you've been working on this for a while, so I'd love to sort of get up to date with where your thinking is on it. So that's sort of my first priority here.
Yeah, your first priority is to kind of catch up with where our thinking is and just be more of a listener to understand where we're coming from or where our thoughts are.
Yeah. I had a conversation with that. It must have been a couple of weeks ago now. I forget the date, but I got out a lot of my frustrations about the lack of definition and how there just isn't a lack. There's just such a lack of consensus, and it was very cathartic actually to sort of share those frustrations. And I think I've been to date just feeling completely helpless, like this is not something that is going to be resolved, and wasn't really even looking to resolve it because I felt that it was irresolvable. So it's so interesting to hear two people that are actually working towards something.
Yeah, so when we talked last time, it was rather cathartic because you've got some frustrations about the definitions and just feel like it was unresolvable. And so you're interested in kind of what we're doing here with, maybe there's hope for somewhere, maybe not. But anyway, it was very cathartic. I'm hearing for your frustrations, to vent your frustrations.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's me. I'm fully heard.
Okay. Well, I'll speak back to you then. Yeah, I think that one thing that's unique about this project is we want to use the empathy circle practice as sort of sort of a foundational practice within sort of exploring this topic. So we're bringing forward the listening and the empathy itself versus sort of more of an academic or intellectual sort of a process. So we're bringing forward this actual empathy in this exploration.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that you're bringing forward not just the aim of exploring the nature of empathy, but also the method in which to do that, which is the empathy circle method. And from what you're saying, that it sounds like that might be the first time that that's being done, and as opposed to the sort of more academic way that it's sort of been, people have been doing in the past.
Yeah, and it's that there's a certain quality of listening that happens with at least with active listening, empathic listening. So we're really trying to create that environment of that listening, that sort of deeper listening. Yeah, I'll just sort of
so I'm hearing the importance of listening here and bringing that in, and that being a really big key component of this practice.
And the other part of it is that we try to define the terms to actually point to what's happening in what we're doing, right? It's not like some abstract, somebody out there is empathizing and we're sort of abstractly trying to, if we're going to talk about emotional contagion or empathic distress, personal distress, or concern, empathic concern, etc. Well, show me the concern, show it to me in the circle, point to the thing that's happening right here in what we're doing.
And so one of the things about using the empathy circle is hopefully to be able to have like really concrete examples of it happening within the empathy circle process, so that you can really point to the different things that have been called empathy and where they're happening within that experience.
Yeah, and I think that that's unique. I haven't heard of it, that sort of being done. The place I'm coming from, the definitions I'm coming from is very based on the work of Carl Rogers, who pretty much, I think he defined the empathy within the context of his empathic listening or active listening to clients and the client therapy. So I think one of the strong points that made him so relevant was that he had a practice that he was doing and he had the experience, 40 years or whatever of actually doing this deep listening versus the analytical looking at analytical relationships.
Yeah, so this is deeply influenced, it sounds like, by Carl Rogers and his therapeutic techniques. And you're sort of pointing out the parallels between what you're doing and what he was doing when he was defining things, and through his practice of doing and sort of pulling the definitions out through the experience.
Yeah, and I think that's what made him so relevant or influential, is he was able to merge the scientific with the experiential part. And so that I think that's a powerful approach.
Yeah, so Carl Rogers is managing to, I really like the way you phrase it, so I'm going to try and say it the same way, mixing the experiential with the academic. I might not have phrased
Scientific.
that. Scientific. There we go.
Yeah, I feel heard.
I'd actually jump back in because I speak to you again, Edwin, because I had some questions
totally free.
on that.
So yeah, listen.
Yeah. So I was hearing what you were saying about pointing to the examples within the empathy circle, and the skeptic of me is coming out and wondering about whether there might be things that have been called empathy that wouldn't be shown. And I was wondering if you had any ideas about whether there might be things that wouldn't be shown.
Yeah, so there's things that are called empathy that might not show up in an empathy circle. I'm just curious about what that might be, if there's any examples of that.
Yes, I feel fully heard.
Okay, speak to Shannon. Yeah, I think that pretty much everything could be brought into the empathy, not everything, but an awful lot. A lot of the blocks to empathy, the things are called empathy, which I see are actually more like blocks to empathy. And even if we can't naturally do it, spontaneously, that it could be role played, for example. We could role play it.
So kind of speaking to this question of what is not empathy, and you're saying that it and other things can be brought into the empathy circle, perhaps not intentionally, but these kind of blocks do show up.
Yeah, so if we're talking about empathy in mice, it might be kind of hard to do, to be, modeling that here, but there might be something. We could actually role play being mice, right? There's the role play, I'm a mouse, you're trapped in this cage, I want to rescue you, or something like that, because there's all those studies.
Yeah, so just like you could role play blocks to empathy, you could role play being like a mouse, and then perhaps blocks to empathy would come up in doing that.
Yeah, and when I talked to Alison last time, I really appreciated the skepticism. I love skepticism. It's like, I don't want all sort of Pollyannish, kind of, we're going to do this, and it's all Pollyannish. Give me the skepticism. Yeah, love it.
So you're appreciating the skepticism that Alison had brought, and that you like that to be challenged in that way.
Yeah, and we've been talking, you and I have been talking about the empathy is sin. There's a group of ministers in Minneapolis, or conservative church. They've been saying, oh, empathy is sin, and sort of making the case for that. So I really appreciate that. And I've been reaching out to them, saying, let's have a dialogue, let's talk about it. And they've been ignoring me, and I've just been sort of hounding them. And they finally have started kind of responding to me.
Oh, okay. So you were kind of drawing a parallel between Alison's skepticism and this group that's talking about empathy being a sin, and that you were similarly kind of drawn to that kind of skepticism and have been trying to talk to them. They finally responded.
Yeah, and I they just ignored me for a month, and then I've been sort of upping my posts to now saying, are pastors who are not empathizing, are they doing Satan's work? So I've been doing these posts, sort of a bit, provocative, and then so anyway, they finally did start responding, says, no, we don't want to talk to you, but it seems like progress that there is responding.
So you've been sort of upping the ante with these people that are claiming empathy as a sin, and and kind of getting more and more provocative with your posts on their page. And they had been ignoring you for so long, but perhaps it was this post, our pastors, that something that you wrote, I don't remember the exact phrase, got them to finally respond with that they don't want to speak. So
yeah, and then I'm engaging in a dialogue. Well, I hear you don't want to speak with me. I'm glad to have 3 of you join in an empathy circle with just me. 3 against 1. It doesn't matter. We just do an empathy circle. So it's like they've had 2 responses. The first one was, well, we don't trust you. You're not doing good faith. And the second one, no, we don't want to talk to you. But I just see any kind of response as like a positive step, So, I mean, there's some kind of something happening.
mm-hmm. So there's been these 2 negative responses, first that they don't trust you, and then kind of more, but you kind of see it that they're engaging at least in this. And so maybe there's a chance that the 3 of them will come in like you asked, and do an empathy circle.
Yeah. So, and the last thing is I actually appreciate the comments that they had, because and we've talked about that what they're actually identifying, the phenomenon they're actually identifying. I actually agree that the phenomenon is a problem, but they're calling it empathy, where I don't think what they're identifying is empathy. So I would actually agree to them that, most of the phenomenon that they're describing are, hey, that those are not good, constructive phenomena.
Mm-hmm. So you actually agree with them in essence, that you agree with what they're saying, but yet it's just a labeling issue, that what they're calling empathy and problematizing under that heading, you don't see it as being empathy at all. So yes, you agree there's a problem, but it's not with empathy.
Right. So yeah, I feel fully heard.
Yeah. Awesome. Alison, you want to be my listener? Yeah, I mean, I find this really kind of fascinating, this group doing this work. And actually, I think it is an issue with, I don't know if it's like self-other differentiation or empathy, but I had this topic come up in class or in conversation with people this week. And it was like, if we empathize too much, do we just, what are we doing as therapists if all we're doing is listening and empathizing? At what point do we become active or encourage other people's agency rather than just listening?
Yeah, so you were sort of talking about something that had come up in a class for you, where perhaps one of your students mentioned that maybe we're empathizing too much, that maybe we're being too passive, and we listen, and where do you strike that balance between passively listening and then sort of actively engaging and encouraging your clients, perhaps?
Mm-hmm, exactly. I feel heard. And I like Edwin, and as reflected by our conversations over the last couple of months, kind of agree that empathy is more complex than just listening or resonating with somebody's experience, that it's much more complex than that. And you can encourage and even insist on somebody else becoming agentic and accountable to their experience while also very much being empathic.
Yeah, so you're sort of recognizing that over your conversations with Edwin over time, that you're recognizing the complexity of empathy, that it's maybe not just listening and resonating, but also could involve sort of more agentic, active, I'm lacking the words, but something more active as well, where you maybe hold people accountable or encourage them to take action as well.
Right. And that I don't think that when we're being empathic, that we have to drop all of our own values and our whole value system. I don't think that's what it is at all. Maybe some people might feel that way, but I think that reflects like a different worldview. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, so you're talking about how important it is maybe to empathize without losing yourself and your own values in that, and then maybe people who feel that empathy requires that, maybe they're sort of not grasping the sort of full possibility of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is. Yeah, I think that's the full thought right now. I mean, I don't know if the difference lies in like a modernistic worldview versus a more postmodern worldview where you have these values and principles and you hold yourself and other people to them versus it's all relative and I don't determine, you know, what's valuable to you or who you should be or what you should live by. So anything goes. Yeah, I don't know if that's the differentiation or really what it is, but I feel like it might have something to do with these different ways that people are seeing empathy itself.
All right, so sort of talking through, thinking through the differentiation between perhaps sort of more absolute moral values and more relative ones, and perhaps these two worldviews intersect with how people feel empathy should work as well.
Yes, I feel fully heard. Thank you.
Thanks. Edwin, I'll speak to you if that's all right, all around. So I've been really loving listening to your conversations, and I'm starting to see the overlap between your two work and sort of Carl Werder's and then your more clinical work, and I'm starting to see things. So I'm really enjoying listening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're really enjoying listening, and it's starting to come together, the Carl Rogers and the clinical work that you're hearing us talk about.
I'm really glad that you appreciate the skeptical voice that maybe I can bring. So it's usually my role in most of my research groups. I'm usually the one that's like, oh, but, and I really like it when people appreciate that, because I feel that is the thing that I bring. So I'm really pleased that you're open to that.
Yeah, you're pleased that I'm open to your skepticism, because that's something that you contribute to the groups that you take part in.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about what you were saying, Edwin, earlier about the pastors and sort of how they were fobbing you off and not wanting to talk to you. And I was wondering whether the difficulty lies both in the requirement for them to talk about a difficult subject and have to talk about it in a new language. And I was wondering whether maybe that's just too much for people and they can't sort of speak like maybe we have to come into their language to have that conversation. I'm just sort of spitballing out loud here, but I
yeah, you're sort of brainstorming, like, what is it to sort of engage with them? Maybe, you know, I'm asking them to come into my language, into my frame of reference. Maybe I should be, or we should be going into their frame of reference. You're just sort of thinking about the possibilities there.
Yeah. Although I'm skeptical of my own self of whether that's something we want to be doing, but was just sort of thinking out loud.
Yeah, you got meta skepticism of your own thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay, I'll speak to Shannon then. So yeah, this actually ties in your just listening, right? That in the empathy circle, we're doing shared listening. It's not like, hey, I'm the therapist, you get your hour, I'm just going to sit and listen to you, and then you're going to, go home. And that's kind of it. So the empathy circle is, hey, I'm going to listen to you, you're going to listen to me. It's a back and forth dialogue. So it's a different, it's seeing empathy in a sort of a relational view. And I think this relational aspect is totally ignored not totally ignored, it's highly often mostly ignored in the empathy discussion.
Yeah. So you're speaking to this concept of seeing empathy as listening, and you're saying that the empathy circles are kind of a counter to that, because there's a mutuality going on where, yes, there is some listening and active listening, but you take turns. And so there's a mutuality and a relationality that isn't present with other types of empathy.
Yeah, so you were trying to get to some deeper kind of concepts, maybe some deeper premises. And the premise was maybe there's these, deeper premises of postmodern and modern sort of thought. And, what are these deeper premises? And there's another premise is individual versus relational. What perspective, are we taking an individual perspective, like only the individual, seeing everything from this individual perspective? Or are we seeing it in a relationship that you and the three of us are here in this mutual empathic relationship dialogue, and there's sort of a hole here, and we're seeing sort of the level of empathy in the relationship.
Yeah. So you were kind of going off that I was trying to find some deeper premise for these differences and how people are viewing empathy. And you're saying, well, we can also look at kind of more individualist definitions versus more relational definitions. That's another way you could see them being differentiated.
And the other part is the sin is empathy. One of their criticisms was, oh, if I'm empathic, I have to listen to this person who's going off, making accusations, doing, all kinds of crazy thinking. Their thinking is not truthful, and I have to just sit there and listen to them. And that's empathy. And there's no sense of truth. I can't tell them what the truth is. Whereas in the empathy, if we're doing mutual empathy, it's like, hey, they get to be heard about whatever crazy stuff that maybe is going on for them, which is very true for them. But then they get to hear me too. So there's, again, that mutuality, which totally overlaps with what you're saying your class, I think, was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're saying that that there seems to be this premise with this group where they're saying empathy is a sin, that that when we're empathizing, we're kind of at the mercy of the person talking, kind of have to accept everything that they're saying. And that's kind of the end of the story. But with the empathy circle, you can get out whatever you need to, but you might, in fact, and you are going to hear back what the other person's kind of thoughts and reaction is to what you said. And so it's not a one-way street.
Exactly, because they're coming at it from this individualistic sort of a perspective, instead of seeing it's a relational perspective. So it seems that this perspective we come at looking at it, it's like, for me, it's like 90% of the problems, the criticisms of empathy, have to do with the perspective we're taking, individualistic or relational.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, because they're holding it as an individualistic kind of phenomenon, that they are seeing it more as a one-way street, and that really greatly influences how they're talking about it. And if we talked about it as a relationship, it might be a different conversation.
Yeah, so they're saying, oh, I'm doing all this empathy, I'm getting swamped in empathy, I'm getting overcome with empathy. But and it looks like, oh, there's all this high empathy, but if you look at the relationship, it's actually kind of low in empathy, in mutual empathy. And so that's another way of measuring it, is what's the level of overall empathy in the relationship? Is it higher or lower? Yeah. So what are we measuring here?
Right. It's like when someone feels very flooded in the midst of empathizing, quote unquote, is that really being strongly empathic? And you're saying, if we look at it as a relationship, no, it's probably a low level of empathy when you look at the relationship as a whole.
Yeah. And again, bringing it to the empathy circle, that problem that they're saying would be, is one person here in the group did all the talking and everybody had to listen to them, and everybody's like totally getting overwhelmed, like I can't take any more. That would sort of be, sort of modeling it in the empathy circle, but we don't do that. We kind of share the time. So I'm trying to just put that into the model of what we're doing here.
Right. Yeah. Like, by the same token, if it was one person in a group or relationship that was like, maybe doing all of the talking, that it would start to feel imbalanced, and therefore there would be a low level of empathy.
Yeah, feel fully heard.
Yeah. I'll speak to Alison. Oh, my mind is swimming a bit. I guess what occurs to me, I've always thought of empathy. I think before working with Edwin, I more thought of empathy as an individual capacity. But yet the more time that I spend talking about it and fleshing out my ideas, the more, and kind of hearing from Edwin, the more I feel that perhaps it is a relational, more of a relational thing.
Yeah, so you're reflecting on your experiences so far, and when you were talking to Edwin, when you first started talking, you thought of empathy as very individual capacity, and now after having conversations, you're starting to consider maybe it's more relational, it's more about like empathy in the pair or the group, I guess.
Yeah, right. Because even when you look at, or when I consider literature in psychotherapy that might hold a lot of what I've read is like it does think of it and talk about it as a more individualistic capacity. There's this advocating for transparency, because if in fact you are kind of taking everything in or being individualistic about resonating as much as possible, or kind of identifying even with the person in front of you, it can start to feel burdensome. And then you can quickly go into a state of mind where it's not empathy whatsoever. And in order to get back to that empathic state of mind, you actually have to, using your word, like have a cathartic moment where you do come out with your thoughts and impressions about what's going on. Because without having done that, without having kind of shared or expelled some of that energy, you can't actually regain your balance in order to be present to the experience any longer.
Yeah, so you're talking about some of the literature in the clinical world generally focuses perhaps on the individual, sort of more empathy, and their solution to perhaps this feeling of this overwhelming burden is to be transparent and to sort of share that after a certain amount of time, so that you don't become overwhelmed by it. But it seems different from the sort of continual sharing that perhaps everyone was talking about.
I think I feel heard. Yeah, I'm sort of, as opposed to what we've been talking about so far, kind of in these empathy circles, I've been thinking a lot, like right now, about like the role that energy plays into all of this. And so I don't know that I have a fully fleshed out thought or not, but it seems as though, there's yeah, I don't know that I can go any further with that, but it seems like there's an amount of energy, emotional energy, that kind of gets titrated in a relationship, and maybe in an empathic relationship. That's really an important part of the whole process.
Yeah, so this has prompted you to start thinking about the role of energy and how that relates. And you're not fully formed that idea yet, but you're sort of starting to think it through.
Thank you. I feel heard.
Okay, thank you. I'll speak back to you, Shannon, if that's all right. So I have a few responses. So I've been listening to what you're both saying, and I'm jotting down notes. I know we're jotting notes there as well, but it's making me think of a lot of other things. And so I'm wanting to share those.
Great. So you've been kind of listening and jotting down notes as we've been talking, and a lot has occurred to you, and you'd like to kind of share a little bit.
Yeah. So first, on the last point you mentioned about energy, that's sort of my whole theory on empathy, if I can have the guts to actually call it my own theory, is all about the role of what I generally call like effort, but you could call it energy. The idea that, well, for me, it's that certain types of empathy require a lot more energy and investment, and other types require less.
Interesting. So you're saying like that last idea about empathy involving energy kind of relates to your theory, and specifically this idea that empathy requires a certain amount of effort, and sometimes more and sometimes less.
Yeah, exactly. So I just sort of wanted to put that out there. I also I wanted to mention that a close colleague of mine who I think Edwin's also spoken to before, Sarah Conrath, she has this theory she's working on of essentially empathy being a vessel that, the level drops as you use it, but the bigger the vessel, the longer you can last. And so she sort of uses that as a metaphor for, we want to encourage people to increase the size of their vessel. And she uses that as a comeback against people who say, empathy is draining. She's like, yeah, but the solution to it being draining is not to give up on it, but to just increase our capacity for it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you're referencing the work of a colleague that both you and Edwin have, who also is developing kind of a theory of empathy. And thinks of empathy as sort of like a vessel where, yes, in fact, the more you empathize, the more that your level might go down of empathy, but that the solution's not to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, but just to increase the size of one's vessel.
Yeah, and as I'm saying this out loud, I'm realizing that empathy scholars love metaphors and that I'm not sure that helps people understand. It might actually add an extra layer of confusion.
Mm-hmm. And that this is a metaphor which might actually make it more difficult to kind of bring home, but
yeah. And then I wanted to talk about something Edwin was talking about that really sparked my thinking when he was talking about this relational back and forth. So I'm thinking now about graduate school and work by psycholinguists on conversation and achieving a mutual understanding within a conversation.
Mm-hmm. So you were reflecting on something Edwin said about empathy being relational, and it reminded you of something from graduate school, and I think I might have missed the end.
Yeah, from psycholinguists' theories on communication. So the idea being that when you're talking to somebody, the burden of understanding is not just on the person doing the talking, but also the person doing the listening. And together you share that burden and achieve together an understanding, which I guess now is actually an old theory, but was a change to their sort of traditional ideas that the speaker has to communicate everything and the listener does nothing.
Interesting. So it's reminding you of these psycholinguists that you worked with in graduate school or kind of read about in graduate school that talked about communication and how normally the burden is on kind of the speaker, I guess, to be as clear as possible. But they talked about how the burden's actually shared between both the speaker and the listener. And it's something maybe that they need to work out or negotiate in order to reach it.
Yeah, and I was wondering if, I don't know, I could return to some of their work and start maybe thinking about how it relates and whether there's anything they could add to sort of how we think about empathy.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you're kind of thinking back to it and wondering what maybe a theory of empathy might add to that kind of theory of communication.
Yeah, thank you. I feel fully heard.
Sure. Yeah. Edwin, sure, I'll speak to you. It's kind of really interesting it's a bit of a shift. I kind of am aware of my mind making between theories that focus on like individual capacities, which I think I've been more used to, and to kind of theories that reframe everything in terms of being part of a relational field. And I think it leads kind of a different view of the mind. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So you're thinking of the different theories you've heard about, individualistic versus relational, sort of relating, and you're seeing that it has a different, it's a different theory of how the mind actually works. So it's kind of a deeper, like, how does the mind really work? Is it individualistic or is it relational? Taps into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it reminds me of a metaphor, speaking of metaphors, that you have used a few times, Edwin, and that I really kind of clung on to, because I thought it felt very right to me, that it felt very true to my experience, that in an empathy circle, it's almost identity building, because every person becomes like a mirror to yourself, and a different sense of self might emerge that you weren't even aware that was there or that you had really.
So the metaphor I mentioned about identity building, being mirrors that you create, you're just thinking about that, creating your identity is created through the mirrors that you have from different people.
Yeah, so even this thing that's just probably the most individualistic construct you could think of, being identity, is actually seems like it's also tied in with relationship and yeah,
so that notion, that very individualistic notion of, hey, your identity as an individual is actually created by a relationships of how you're mirrored by others, is creating that individualistic identity.
Yeah, I think that's all for now. I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay, I'll speak to Alison then. Yeah, I made a note here about how does this fit in the empathy circle? So we're talking about energy, for example. It's like, where is the energy in this empathy circle, right? We're into. So I was thinking, I'm going to keep trying to point to what's happening in the circle itself so we can sort of identify the phenomenon or the experience that's happening. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so you're thinking through the idea of energy that me and Shannon were talking about, and sort of trying to think about where that fits into the empathy circle. When do we see that? How does that metaphor relate to what we see in practicality?
Yeah, so I guess we could say, where's the individual? Like, here we are, there's three of us here. Where's the individual and where's the relationship? You know, we could try to point that out, because I see three of us. I see myself too. talking about being mirrored, I'm seeing myself mirrored. So I have a sense of the whole here too, a feeling of the whole, as well as in my brain, I feel sort of an awareness of sort of the thoughts that are coming. And so I'm sort of aware of different sort of spaces here in this empathy circle.
Yeah, so you're talking through trying to see where the individual and where the relational group is within the empathy circle, and you're sort of pointing out, you know, in Zoom, we're seeing each other in separate boxes, and we're also seeing ourselves, and we're seing all of us. I'm assuming we all have it set to group view where you can see everybody.
At least I do.
Right, and sort of thinking through where all that lies.
Mm-hmm. And there's also the felt experience, because, you know, Shannon and I, the last time we talked, we didn't record that section, but we were talking about the felt experience of cognition and imagination, and that really stuck with me, because I had a real sense, because Shannon was talking about cognition, she could feel her awareness going into this part of her, you know, body, versus imagination, which was more of a, for at least for her, a full-bodied sort of experience. And so that's, when what we were talking about was like made sort of concrete like that, it just kind of really stuck with me in terms of an idea and an awareness.
Yeah, so you're referencing a conversation you and Shannon had in a previous empathy circle, where you were sort of focusing on the felt experiences of empathy, and how cognition feels sort of maybe more centered, but imagination feels more outward.
Full-bodied, at least in this case, it was a full-bodied experience, that you imagine something, you sort of feel it in your whole body. And yeah.
Yeah, so correction there, that it's really your full body that you're feeling it with all the way down.
Yeah, so and then there was some talk about energy, and I was curious, I don't remember what it was, but I'm wondering, okay, where's the energy that you're talking about? So somebody was talking about energy. Where is the energy? Where do you see the energy, so that we don't get too abstract, but, you know, bring it into what's actually happening in the empathy circle, because there is an energy, right? There's, like, I feel this is fun, this is enjoyable, and so there is that energy. There's sort of, yeah, there's just all kinds of different energies happening here.
Yeah, so you're thinking of where you can see the energy in the empathy circle. You're sort of speaking about how you can feel it, but maybe it's harder to visualize.
Yeah, and I'm seeing you move your hands. So there's a level of energy to your hands, right? It's like, I tend to kind of speak with my hands too, and there's put a lot of energy into it. And is it slow energy, or is it, faster energy? So sort of just identifying, if we're talking about energy, where is the energy? What that you're talking, whoever was, I can't remember who was talking about energy, but where is that energy?
Yeah, so you're pointing out that I'm moving my hands, and you do the same thing, and you can do that with enthusiasm or less, and maybe that's a sort of visual marker of the energy in the conversation.
Yeah, feel fully heard.
Yeah, so I'm still really excited about this idea of energy, and I'm wondering.
Speaking to?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll speak to you, Edwin, if that's all right.
Yeah, you're really interested, excited about this sense of energy.
Well, I was actually just going to ask a question, and maybe you could follow up. Is that do empathy circles differ in their amount of empathy? So maybe if you don't show it visually in one empathy circle, maybe you can compare, like, do people have lower energies in others and high? So I just wondered if you could speak to that.
Oh, so you're just curious about the levels of energy within different empathy circles, and just sort of a curiosity about that, and if I could speak to it. Feel heard?
Yes, I feel fully heard.
Okay, I'll speak back then. Yeah, the circles is like all over the place. It a lot depends on what people bring to it. Like sometimes people I don't even have never seen before. I mean, they just share something really personal in the group, and it just creates this, real intimacy in the group. And other times it's, kind of more intellectual, and it's more abstract, and it has a different feeling. So every circle is just very different.
Yeah, so you're answering my question there about the different empathy circles and their levels of energy, and pointing out they are all very different, and that sometimes they can feel sort of more academic and abstract, and other times someone can share something really personal, and that changes the tone of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it has a sort of an intimacy, level of intimacy. So I'm thinking, wow, they're sharing this, these intimate dynamics that they're having in their family or in their relationships, and with the group people they don't even know. I'm kind of like sometimes amazed at the depths of sharing.
So you're sharing your amazement at how much people share, often so quickly, with a group of strangers in the empathy circle setup.
And the feeling I've been getting recently has been a lot of gratitude, in the sense that, oh, I'm coming into a space where I'm being heard. My sense is the culture is getting more and more sort of conflicted, more and more environments where people don't feel heard. So people come into an empathy circle and they feel heard, like, I haven't been heard for a long time. And there's a sense of sort of gratitude and, hey, this feels pretty good. And there's a sort of a gentleness that sort of has been, so I've just been noticing that recently.
Yeah, so you're talking about some of your observations of particularly more recent times that people have been feeling a lot of gratitude, and you're wondering as to whether maybe that's because they're not feeling heard perhaps as much in their rest of their lives, and so they really bring this wonderful gracious feeling when they are being heard in the empathy circle.
And I think that was one of your points previously. You'd mentioned the effort of somebody trying to listen to you, that effort has a lot of just salience or importance or appreciation for people that, hey, you've made the effort. So yeah, I think that there's a appreciation in each other in being willing to listen, and yeah, and there's a feeling that comes up with that.
Yeah, so you're pointing to that listening requires effort, and perhaps sort of talking about what we were talking about before regarding effort, that maybe that's really being shown in this process. And that's maybe why people are feeling the gratitude, because they're recognizing the effort that other people are putting in.
Yeah, but sometimes it's not even effort, in the sense if you're doing something that's really fun and you're getting sort of fed by it, like, hey, I'm coming to the empathy circle, I'm going to get heard, and it feels really good, and it's sort of a joy. You're kind of, it doesn't have the, like, hey, this is work, we gotta, this is heavy, you gotta really suffer to, work at this. It's like, hey, this is fun, I want to do it, I want to get supported. There's a nourishment, nourishing quality to this.
Yeah, so you're sort of reflecting back there that maybe it's not effort as sometimes we would construe it as like hard work and not enjoyable, but maybe sort of returning to the word energy about it. It's something more fun, and
you're sort of drawn to it, like, hey, I want to do this. Yeah.
Right. So it's not something that you're laboring to do. Yeah.
But for people who are new to it, there can be a lot of labor, because you got to really focus and listen, and they might not be used to that. So there's kind of, you're rewiring your brain, and it's like there's actually it can be painful, because you have to sort of shift the way you think. But if you kind of get into that mode and you've kind of rewired your brain, there's less effort, because those neurons are just, the pathways are maybe already highly developed.
Yeah, so you're sort of talking about how certain people do find the empathy circle setup more strenuous, and these tend to be people who are new to it, that struggle. But then with with practice, and over time, this becomes a more perhaps automatic skill that you can do more easily because you're more practiced at it.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. I was just thinking, oh, where's your skepticism? Skepticism. It just kind of crossed my mind. I said, oh, where's Alison's skepticism?
And I can bring it now if you
Okay,
want.
great. I feel fully heard.
Yeah, I'll speak to Shannon, but I'm probably going to talk about a lot of what you said, Edwin. So I love speaking to you about this because it's really reflecting a lot of the issues that I'm thinking of, but in like a different way.
So Alison, you're starting out by saying like you'd like to respond to what Edwin was talking about because it's kind of making you think about some of the same things that you've been working on, but in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talk about my theories like this difference in some types of effort, sometimes for empathy being more effortful, but I do struggle with that word effort for exactly the reasons that Edwin is pointing out. When we think effort, we think bad and strenuous, and that's not necessarily what we're trying to get here. Something more along the lines of how practiced something is, or how I'm struggling for words, but I'm thinking about the importance of words when we're trying to communicate like what I mean here.
Oh. So you struggle with this idea of effort for exactly the reason that Edwin was pointing out, that oftentimes our associations to the word effort are that it's like hard or strenuous, and that's not exactly what you mean. It's like in that you're kind of trying to find the right words to describe what you do mean when you say that.
Yeah, exactly. And I was also thinking about this idea of something becoming easier with practice, and obviously psychology would tell us, that's a thing, and things get more automatic as you practice them. And I'm thinking of that in relation to empathy, and maybe it isn't, as I was initially conceptualizing it, as certain types of empathy just being more difficult, but maybe for individual people, certain types get easier the more you do them.
Mm-hmm. So you're integrating this idea of maybe the more you practice it, the easier it gets. But you're not like and certainly psychology would that's borne out in the research, but then you're wondering if maybe that differs between people, that maybe for some people it gets easier, but perhaps not for others.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons empathy is perhaps so complex is that, it's not one size fits all with people. Mm-hmm. I was actually also wanting to sort of reflect back on bringing in the neuro stuff that we talked about right at the beginning, and I think Edwin just touched on it as well. So a lot of that work, at least my understanding of it, is working on this more sort of automatic, immediate emotional responses or neural responses to seeing someone hurting or something. And I was sort of thinking about I've lost my train of thought, but I was sort of thinking how that feeds into it as sort of a measure of maybe that less effortful or incredibly well practiced responses would be another way of thinking of it.
Yeah, that maybe that you're saying empathy perhaps isn't a one size fits all, and this actually might relate to some of the neuroscience research that was brought up in the beginning, and this idea that there's some sort of automaticity or there's an automatic kind of response that we often have. And yeah, you're building on that, I think.
Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Yeah, sure. Edwin, will you be my listener? Okay, awesome. Let's see. So this is just a really thought-provoking conversation. I really appreciate I really appreciate being part of it. And I really like the idea of thinking about effort and energy. And I'll just start with that.
Yeah, you're really appreciating this conversation and this topic of effort and energy. Sounds like you want to explore that a bit.
Yeah, and because I work with, or I speak with, I'm people in training to be clinical psychologists, and I myself have been supervised and have been learning to do this. And I've, speaking of metaphors, kind of been advised to, you don't have to take things in quite so deeply. Think of being a therapist kind of like hitting a beach ball back and forth, just very light and gentle. And that's a metaphor that pops into my mind all the time, especially when I'm working really hard to try to get another person, I think, why can't I just, you know, do the beach ball thing? So
Mhm.
also, yeah.
Yeah, when you're doing your therapeutic work, that sounds you take in what's happening. It sounds like deeply, and it sounds maybe it's a bit of a burden. And you'd like somebody said just be a beach ball where you're just sort of tapping it sort of lightly back and forth, so it doesn't have that deep impact.
Hmm. Yeah, and you know, I don't have any hard and fast conclusions about this topic, but I just think it's like it's fascinating also to meet people who are now going through training and running into the same thing where they have certain people that they work with that they have formed such quick, deep and wonderful relationships with, and then they have others with whom this way of empathizing, bringing things in so deeply doesn't really work. And so
Mm.
what's the answer? I don't know, but I think I relate to what Alison was saying, in that I think there's a lot of individual differences or relational differences in how empathy ends up looking.
So there's other people that sort of have that's the same sort of dynamic happens with them, that they really connect with someone and they take in deeply what that person says. But for that approach, that deep listening doesn't work for everyone, that same dynamic. So it's very individualistic, and
Yeah,
sort of overlaps with what Alison was saying, that it's different for different people, the experience.
yeah, that's right. I feel heard. And also, some people will really appreciate that. They'll feel that, oh, wow, this person's putting in so much energy, and wow, I feel so accepted and empathized with. And other people, it will be lost on them. That energy will not be, the energy does not get received or in the way that you would intend. And it doesn't actually make a difference in terms of relationship building with certain people.
Yeah, so with certain people, that taking it in deeply really creates a deeper connection, whereas other people it just doesn't really resonate, doesn't really build that connection with them. And it's just very different.
Yeah. So that's my thank you. I feel heard. Yeah.
Okay. Guess I'll speak back to you then. Yeah, we started talking about the automatic responses. So you and I have talked quite a bit about the affective and cognitive, topic. Whereas I really don't like that framing. I don't even, not sure where it really started, but I find that I see it as sort of an impediment to an empathy movement, because it's just too complicated, too confusing for the average person.
You're referencing this dichotomy between cognitive empathy and affective empathy, and it just doesn't feel right to you. It just feels too complicated, especially for a layman or average person. Doesn't feel helpful.
Yeah, so for me, the definitions is about creating sort of understanding, creating a foundation for a movement of empathy, right? I think we want to spread empathy in the world. That if we can, just have people learn to be more empathic with each other, hear each other, connect more deeply with each other, understand each other. That just creates greater well-being. The world just feels better. For at least for me, it feels better. And how do we support that? And saying, hey, you got to have cognitive empathy or affective empathy. There's the average person is like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. So like for you, the main goal would be developing a typology of empathy that could be distilled down to a few key words that could be translatable or understandable to anyone. And so that could be easily disseminated. And having words like, oh, you got to do more cognitive or effective empathy doesn't feel like a helpful way to break things down.
Yeah.
So that people could understand and use
So I
it.
have a little concern, because both of you are coming from the from the academic world, where this is like, is like so deeply ingrained that oh, I get to be the skeptic. Yay. I'm so skeptical about that approach that it just seems, I think it has a lot of problems.
Mhm. So you're a little bit worried about the academic, using a academic lens on this concept of empathy, because then how do you translate it to?
No, it was that both of you are coming from an
That right?
academic point of view, and I'm saying, hey, that's a pretty shitty approach. I'm really skeptical about it. And oh, will I be kind of offending you or something like that? So it's a bit like Alison say, she appreciated, my being open to the skepticism. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So feeling, I don't know that I have it. I think like
Mhm.
you're feeling skeptical of the skeptics.
No. I'm going to be attacking, criticizing affective empathy and cognitive empathy. And it seems to me it's kind of like the religion of academia, right? And
Okay.
you're both coming out of academia. So I'm afraid I'm going to be attacking your religion.
So you are really against this dichotomy between cognitive and effective empathy, and you kind of want to attack this whole premise, but you worry that that in so doing, you'll be kind of attacking a more academic way of seeing things, and thus maybe where me and Alison are kind of coming from.
Right. So I appreciate Alison's skepticism that she values it. So I feel more comfortable attacking it because Alison is out there trying to, find loopholes and criticize things. So I feel a kindred spirit.
Okay.
It creates more space. It creates more space for just kind of throwing out anything. Yeah.
Interesting. So like knowing that there's another skeptic kind of gives you permission to also put on your like skeptic kind of lenses. And so, yeah. And
yeah, very much so. That really hits it. That hits the nail on the head. Yeah, I feel. So there's a whole, I think it'll become a big topic, affective, cognitive, and what all that means. It's so central to the discussion, but I'll pause there to recuperate.
It feels like we came to an understanding, and yeah, it feels like there's going to be more discussion maybe of that dichotomy as we move forward. But
yeah, I feel heard.
Okay, cool. Alison, awesome, thanks. I don't know if I have too much to add at this point. Well, I find myself very intellectual right now. I don't know, maybe this is in response to what Edwin was saying. I'm sort of rebelling, going into my head.
So you're not sure how to respond. I think you're still working through it in your head, but potentially because Edwin has put out this criticism of academic thinking, it's actually got you thinking even more.
Right. Yes, that captures it. But I think it has to do with this dichotomy between cognition and imagination. I'm not really quite sure how yet. I haven't fleshed that out, but the idea that all the energy is in the mind with cognition, and with imagination, it's more free floating, more embodied. Like I actually have to put myself in imagine myself in somebody else's life in order to engage in imagination. Whereas with cognition, I just kind of I use my logic to think my way into another person's perspective. And yeah, that's kind of my mind has gone to that dichotomy.
So you're bringing up another dichotomy that you think is more important, perhaps, or more pertinent, which is between cognition and imagination. And I want to make sure I get this right because I've never heard this one before. So cognition is thinking your way into another person's perspective sort of logically, whereas imagination would be, see, this is where I get lost. Could you repeat that part?
Well, I mean, I think of it in terms of Mark Davis's breakdown with fantasy proneness being one component of empathy. So I always think about like engaging in a fantasy that you were literally another person. Like I'm literally, whatever the case may be.
Okay, yeah, so you're thinking of it as in Mark Davis's distinction between fantasy and perspective taking, which has really helped me, so thank you. So sort of really feeling embodied into an entirely different character or person there.
Yeah, that's good. I feel heard. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just an immediate response. Language is so hard. As soon as you said it a different way, I got it. So thank you. Edwin, I'll talk to you.
Okay.
So I sort of want to sort of immediately say thank you for bringing the skepticism. I think that the only way we're going to ever improve on this quagmire of empathy is if we do speak up. So thank you.
So you're appreciating the skepticism because that's how we learn and grow. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say I come from almost the opposite world, where most of my colleagues hate the cognitive affective distinction also, but do so because they believe it's too simplistic and a distinction and not complex enough.
Oh, okay. So the community that you come from, they don't like the cognitive affective because it's like simplistic and there's just not complicated enough.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to hear that, you know, that distinct. I feel like that distinction is going out. Like it's been very, very popular, but the way I see it going is it's going out of vogue rapidly. I don't expect it to be used much more in a decade or so, but where it's going to go after that seems like a complete mystery.
Yeah, so you're seeing, it sounds like you're sort of at the place where you can see the trends, and the trend is that that's going out of vogue and something new is going to emerge and you don't know what that new is.
Yeah, exactly. I have colleagues who would prefer to go the route of, you know, 100 definitions of empathy and stop using the word empathy entirely because it's just too vague, and then just stick to the ones that you specifically mean. And then I hear you, Edwin, which is the other side of the voice, saying that you want to find one sort of unifying definition that we can all get behind to sort of, and I think you have sort of a practical purpose there driving that that desire. So yeah.
Yeah, so you're seeing different approaches. There's some it sounds like in your community, they want to really get nuance in the different aspects and have maybe different names for them, versus me having kind of a broader term, but you see the practicality aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think in reality, if we don't live in our ivory tower as academics, the word empathy isn't going to go away. Like that's become much more popular word. So it's going to keep being said. So even as empathy academics, we decide not to use it anymore, that's not going to stop other people using it. And then you will just be left with this vacuum of yeah.
Yeah, so if the academics go down the route of not using the term and you know, having very nuanced words for the experiences, and then the rest of the community, lay people, are going to still be using it. There's going to be this vacuum between these two terms, between how the lay use it and the academics.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's already a vacuum, but it may just get worse. So.
Yeah, so that it's already there, that vacuum may just keep expanding.
Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay, so yeah, maybe I'll speak back to you, Alison. So the definition of empathy that I'm using is, you know, very built on what Rogers is doing, you know, sensing into someone's experience, kind of in this broad sense. And so it's more the actual process of sensing into. So yeah, I'll start there.
Yeah, so you're describing to me that your working definition of empathy is based on Rogers's work of sensing into someone's experience. And I'm writing that down. And yeah, I think you stopped.
Yeah, that was the first. Yeah, first. So right now I'm speaking. You know, I'm seeing what sort of arises in me, and that's sort of like a self-empathy. I'm just seeing what sort of arises in me. I'm sensing into myself, and there's sort of an emergence that's happening, and then I'm sharing it with you, and you're listening. You're very focused, and I can, you know, you're reflecting what I'm saying. So you're sort of sensing into. There's a process of sensing into my experience here.
Yeah, okay, so you're describing first a process of sort of self-empathy, of sensing or introspection, maybe looking inside of yourself and feeling and describing your feelings. And then I'm doing that as well, also sensing into you
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
So I see what you're doing is an empathy, sensing into my experience. So I don't know how that would fit in the cognitive, affective, just that process that you're doing of sensing into my experience. I don't know, where would the cognitive, where would the affective be? Because it seems like it's all kind of mushed together.
Yeah, so you're sort of questioning within that idea of sensing into somebody where the cognitive and the affective empathy, where that lies in that mush.
Yeah, and where's the, if I like the term imaginative empathy, that there is something where we can role play, we can take on roles, where we could do an empathy circle. We each take on a role of a different character here in the circle. We're not ourselves, but we're sensing into those roles. And I would call that imaginative empathy, that's sort of the secondary response is we can kind of add an imagination component. We can think ourselves into anything. And so I consider that, yeah, what I call imaginative empathy.
So you're sort of also talking about this term imaginative empathy, which you appreciate because it can describe how we can sense into people's roles that aren't necessarily themselves. So you could role play a character and you could still sense, so I guess it's meta, sensing into something that is somebody's already also embodying something different. I might be getting a bit lost.
Yeah, it's more that like when we do conflict, we do some practice conflict mediation. We can create a scenario where we're role playing a scenario in a work environment. Like I can be the boss, you could be an employee, there could be a family member, Shannon's a family member, and there's a conflict and we all come together. So we're role playing that situation. That's typical in mediation training. You do these role plays. So we have to imagine ourselves in those roles and then act with whatever comes up out of those roles. And it's amazing how real to life those roles playing can be. So that imagining into those roles is what I'm considering as sort of an imaginative empathy.
Okay, so you're clarifying here of what that imaginative empathy is, and it's imagining into a role, and you're sort of talking through how a lot of this comes from sort of mediation work and conflict resolution, where people will take on different roles and then talk through to their problems, embodying those roles, and how that can actually really reflect real life. I think you were speaking to.
Yeah, so that's sort of the framework I use, and it has sort of a practicality to it. So I'm looking for a skeptical approach to that. Shannon's not skeptical enough. So I'm counting on you to be really skeptical about that framing.
All right, so you're sort of explaining the question here, and you're looking for me to have a skeptical response.
Yeah, I feel heard.
I'll speak to you, Shannon, but I'll probably respond to Edwin. So I as soon as you were talking about the sensing into I've written it down, sensing into someone's perspective. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was immediately thinking of that as sort of the outcome. Outcome's not the right word. That is what you want to achieve. You want to achieve the ability to sense into someone, and I would think of cognitive and affective empathy as maybe the ways that get you there. So that's how I would see a connection there.
Mm-hmm. So Alison, I hear you kind of zeroing in on this phrase that Edwin used, which was like sensing into someone else's perspective. And you were drawing a connection back to this dichotomy between cognitive and affective empathy by saying the cognitive and affective empathy are the avenues through which you get to sensing into somebody's experience. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be how I would see it. Although I've not given that much critical thought to that. It's just sort of that would be how I've always thought of it. So I certainly don't have a powerful attachment to that idea, and I could be wrong, but I think of them as ways of helping you to sense into someone. So some people might rely on that more logical process, and other people might rely on that more imaginative. And so I'm thinking of them as different strategies people use in order to achieve that sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That you've always kind of thought of it this way, so you're not too tied to it yet, but you're thinking that maybe individual differences factor into this, and that some people might need to use more of the cognitive or logical pathway to get to that sensing into experience, where others might draw more on their own emotional experience to get to it.
Yeah, exactly. I feel fully heard. Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah. I'll speak back to you, Alison, if that's okay. I don't know. I feel very at home in this this kind of discussion, and I'm actually used to parsing it out in terms of cognitive affective empathy. I don't. It's difficult though when we're speaking from an experience near place. I can't pinpoint a moment in time where I'm just using cognitive or just affective. Like I've tried because I'm drawn to that literature, but it feels as though if I try to freeze freeze frame any moment in time during the empathy process, there's none where just one is happening. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're talking about feeling at home in this discussion, because this cognitive affective distinction is something that you think a lot about, you work with, but maybe it's more of an academic distinction, because in practicality you feel like you use multiple at the same time, and that you're never using just solely one of these strategies I'm going to go for in order to achieve that aim that Edwin was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just now it popped into my mind, like what would be the drawback of advocating for one or over the other? I think that could actually be kind of dangerous, like, because I'm again referencing a conversation I had in class, and that for some people certain definitions of empathy make sense, and maybe we'll get them to that feeling into state of mind where they're able to be there. For other people, those definitions make no sense at all. And so who am I to say this is the definition we all have to use? And if you don't get it, like, you need to go see someone about increasing your empathic capacity. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you started off with questioning, is there a drawback to advocating, one strategy to empathy over another? And that you're referencing an experience you had in your class with your students, that some of when you're teaching some definitions of empathy, some students it sort of resonates with them, they get that makes sense, and with others they don't. And so you were sort of thinking through, I guess, do we have the right to tell them that one is the right one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm kind of wary of dictating too much somebody's experience of empathy, just because it feels like a very personal process. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you're concerned or skeptical about the dictating a definition of empathy. Is it's such a personal experience to people, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yet not having a definition comes with its own drawbacks, and probably more drawbacks than does advocating for one solid kind of standard way of doing it. Yeah.
So you're sort of reflecting on the other side, which is that not having any definition and not giving any guidance on that leads to the sort of the mess we're in now, and that may be even more problematic.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. I'll speak to Edwin again. That's all right.
Listening.
I don't have much to say. I've really enjoyed hearing these different ideas. I sort of intuitively agree with Shannon of what she said about feeling worried about dictating, but that's really the only response I have at the moment.
Yeah, you don't have a lot more coming up, and it's you're sort of kind of resonate with Shannon about dictating a definition. Maybe a discomfort about that.
Yeah, that's me. I feel heard.
Okay. So do we want to sort of kind of close here and just, I don't know, see if we can get a summary, or how is everyone? It sounds like both were sort of talked out.
Maybe we could debrief and do a summary. Does
Okay.
that seem like a good next
Yeah.
step?
And that was one of the, okay, yeah. And so one of the things is processes is Shannon and I have been, having these circles, but we didn't take any notes, because if you're just two people, it's hard to take notes. And we're looking at how do we get a summary, so we don't have a kind of a real process worked out. This is like the next stage here with, it's all taking notes. So we got a lot of notes. I don't know how to synthesize it, or I don't know. I don't have any good process for the next stage for sort of getting a summary. And we'll also have, the transcripts too will be available.
Yeah. Well, it definitely seemed like some new points came up in this session compared to, and then some things we repeated. So might take a while going through the transcripts to hit on those key points, I'm thinking. I don't know that doing it right now is, it's hard because I feel like I'm still processing a lot of it. Sorry, I think I cut you off, Alison.
No, it's all right. It's just being the new person. So I'm unfamiliar which ideas have sort of gone around before and which ones are new. And so at some point I'd love to get to find that out.
Should we say right now? I mean, a little bit about Edwin, what, maybe we've repeated, or what continues to be a theme and what maybe is new?
Okay, do you want to start, like what you're seeing?
Well, we've been talking about these dichotomies, and we've been in general moving towards something more unifying. So I think that we all kind of spoke to that, which was great. And this idea of feeling into is an experience near definition that perhaps people outside the field can grasp easily, and maybe can be tailored. It's broad enough so that people, regardless of their individual differences, might be able to get on board with it and find a home for it, or make it their own type of thing.
Yeah, I think the framework of affective and cognitive empathy is, we've talked a lot about that, and I've been sort of advocating for a sort of a different view of it, and we've had a lot of discussions, back and forth. I think exploring it, as well as I've tried to bring up the what we're talking about, where is it happening right now, right in the here and now. So if we're saying effective empathy, where do you see the effective empathy happening in the relationship or the discussion right now? Or where do you see cognitive empathy, or where do you see both, or where do you see parts of each in so I've been trying to sort of get to that experience near, I think you're calling it, or the naming the experiential. So yeah, so that's kind of what's coming up for me. And there's also, having another voice, another perspective, I really enjoy it. It just adds to the dynamics. And that's why I think the empathy circle itself, with 4 people, it's not only you get multiple points of view, which really enriches the whole discussion, I find too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for joining. It was really great.
Yeah. So what's the next time, or how does the schedules look? We've been meeting every 2 weeks at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And Shannon's got, I think you'll have more time, you were saying, in the new year or something. You get like finals or something now.
Even 2 weeks from now is going to be a different world, because I'll be on the other side of things. So
I can do 2 weeks from now. After that, I don't plan too far in advance, because I have interviews coming up and things, but
Great.
I'm pretty solidly a yes for 2 weeks from now, unless something crazy comes up.
Awesome.
Great. Okay. Well, I will post this to YouTube. I'll run it through the transcriptions and add it to the website. So you can, I don't know if you've seen the website. Let me just quickly share that just as a reference is, and we can go over this in detail. It's maybe in after several meetings, several empathy circles kind of review this. So go to empathydefinitions.com. I had thought of maybe defining empathy would be a better name, but I'd love to get your feedback on that. So I put together this page on the blocks to empathy. So those are different topics too, to talk about what are the blocks to empathy, or there's also kind of development, just some different links. There's the team, each have our own pages, different typologies, been, putting together, just starting to list some of the typologies. The whole sin discussion, Alison, you'd say we're interested in that. And these are discussions, people have been talking about that sin discussions. There's a whole big discussion in the evangelical community about sin. So I've been sort of tracking.
Somehow I managed to miss this completely until you put this on my radar, Edwin. I had no idea this was out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a closed community, so it's not kind of like out real public. But I'm crashing their party. So, and having an evangelical background myself and the path, growing up, that I kind of really resonate with the dynamics. And then the meetings you can go through, and I'll post it here, post the meeting here. So that's just where you can find and, just kind of review the site you can, and I think Shannon has permission, so you'll be able to go in and, add to the site or edit if you want.
Cool.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. See you next in 2
See
weeks.
everyone. Yeah. Take care. Have a
Bye.
good
Bye.
night.
Have a good
Bye.
week. Bye.